Hello, hello. Welcome back to Let's Talk Entertainment. So this morning I'm going to do something that's both in my wheelhouse and out of my wheelhouse. I'm going to review a graphic novel. This was sent to me by writer Bruce Brown, who worked on this project with a handful of other people. And it is a reimagining of the 1920 short story by H.P. Lovecraft, The Cats of Ulthar. And it is in the graphic novel format, a format that I have almost no experience with, so I figured the best way to do this is to try and break it down between story and then the artwork. But before we get there, just a little bit of background on this story if you're not familiar with it. The Cats of Ulthar is a 1920, very early short story, stylized in the style of the legendary Lord Dunsany by H.P. Lovecraft. And I reviewed it for the first time in 2019 as part of my show, Let's Talk H.P. Lovecraft. The village of Ulthar and some of the characters later appear in other Lovecraft stories, including The Other Gods and The Dream Quest of Unknown Kadath, which is my favorite Lovecraft story. And I guess that would put the village of Ulthar in the Dreamlands, which is a very interesting piece of real estate in the Lovecraft universe. To prepare for this video, I decided that I should probably reread this story. I also took a few minutes, 8 minutes to be exact, to listen to the audiobook version done by the wonderful YouTube channel Horror Babble, which is a channel that I always go back to when I'm looking for something to listen to at night trying to fall asleep. And it's fun to drift away into these sort of realms of weird fiction. So what is the story about? The Lovecraft version, an unnamed narrator describes how cats have been disappearing around the village of Ulthar, and an old couple is suspected when a band of traveling people come into town the next day. One of them has a little cat. The cat disappears. Some people believe that maybe these travelers are taking the cats, but no. An old couple at the edge of town is suspected, and one night the cats go out, and apparently they eat these people. And then over the next few days, none of the cats is hungry. They don't eat because they fill their bellies on the flesh of these nasty old people. So that is it. This story is about 3-4 pages long. Probably not even 1,000 words, I would guess. It's all exposition. It's done by a narrator. There's no dialogue. That brings us to the reimagined version. This version reframes the story as a father cat telling his children about an event that happened in his grandfather's time, as a bedtime story to get them to go to sleep. And this is interesting because Lovecraft's version is actually, I assume, narrated by a human being. I always got the sense that it was narrated by a human being, but I love the idea that they put the cats in the driver's seats in this version. Also, what's interesting is that this version is virtually all dialogue, whereas the Lovecraft version had no dialogue. It was all sort of exposition, but, you know, don't look for any any dialogue symbols. The story parallels Lovecraft for a little while, and then it diverges into its own reimagining, which I think is good. Why bother doing this at all if you're not going to add something of your own into it? You know, this is a public domain story. You could probably use it almost verbatim, but I love the idea that they did something a little bit different with it. And I won't spoil what they did exactly, but I think that it leans into the horror elements, which I think is a wise move. Lovecraft is best known for horror, but I would say that more often than not, his stories lean more towards fantasy. I thought of the Cats of Ulthar more as a fantasy story with a small horror element, but I love how this version sort of leans into the horror element, and that's interesting to have that juxtaposed against the idea that it's in fact a bedtime story being told to a couple of young kitty cats. So yeah, I have a very favorable impression of what they did with the story here. There's not a lot of story to go with, really, so I think you almost had to do something a little bit different. And then that moves us on to the artwork. When I went through the book, 24 pages long, I found myself the first time around being unable to pay attention to anything but the but the text. And that probably comes from the fact that I have little to no experience with this format. So what I had to do was go back a second time and pay attention strictly to the artwork. I've always been most comfortable in the realm of words. My mother is the visual artist in our family, but I also have a sister who is a musician and another sister who has written 6 novels. I fancy myself to be something of an amateur poet these days. So I don't really necessarily have much vocabulary for talking about art, but I found the use of deep, vibrant colors that sort of changed appropriately with the changing of the mood to be an effective use of color. I associate Lovecraft's work, now that I think about it, with the colors of like purple and green, sort of a sickly, eerie, ghostly green, but also a dark, rich purple, which is also a very... it's a color that's very well suited to horror, I would say. I also thought it was interesting that the story device which they used allowed a lot of leeway to portray these characters, these cats, in multiple ways. I always imagined that Lovecraft was writing about typical little house cats, and we get a little bit of that. But at some point in the story, there is a transformation that takes place. I won't say anything more about that transformation, but I love how it allowed 2 sort of distinct design aesthetics to take place, and a third aesthetic if you talk about the human characters, which there are a few who appear in these panels. And despite, having these sort of 3 distinct character groups, it all does feel pretty cohesive, and it works with the background as well. So very well done on the artwork. Again, you might as well be doing magic because, I lack that skill to do visual artwork. So to me, it's like you're a wizard, you're practically a wizard, but I think it does work here very, very effectively. So in conclusion, I would say that I still get a lot more fulfillment from the written word, reading a short story, as opposed to the graphic novel format, which is a combination of the two. But I realize that some people are more visual people. I'm more of a text-based person. So I would say that I derive probably more fulfillment from the original story than I do from this production. But at the same time, it's interesting that having read the original story, that gives me a lot of preconceived notions and imagination to go on. So I'm seeing different things initially in my imagination than what I'm seeing on the page, but now undoubtedly, like when your favorite book gets turned into a movie, the movie ultimately begins to affect the way that you envision the story in your mind. And I think that's an interesting phenomenon that takes place in this world where we do commonly adapt things between different formats. Being familiar with the source material first, I'd be interested to know, perhaps you're in the comment section below, if you have not read this story, but you do read the graphic novel first, I'd like to know your impressions, because I think that's an interesting experiment to see what you take away from it versus what I took away from it. As a writer, as an amateur poet, I have respect for all artists, and I think this is a marvelous production. Kudos for being able to see this project through to conclusion. My last couple of decades is littered with unrealized projects based on ideas, and you have that initial burst of creativity and interest, and then ultimately, as the shit hits the fan, you lose your resolve and you don't get the project done. But I think it's amazing that this project came into existence. Looks like it was a lot of hard work, and it looks like it's resulted in a pretty high quality production. So I'm going to highly recommend it. I see that it is available on Amazon through Kindle. It looks like a price tag of around $10. I would say that is a steal if you do choose to check that out. I will leave a link in the description. I wasn't asked to do that, but I've chosen to do that because I do believe in this project. It's pretty awesome. So there you have it. Thank you for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe. Check out some of our other videos here on the channel. I have a whole collection of H.P. Lovecraft short story reviews. I read and reviewed each and every short story that he ever laid his fingers on, so you may enjoy those videos. But until next time, as always, keep it creepy.